welcome to yet another episode of the Chronic Nirvana podcast series. In today's episode, we're joined by probably our first near celebrity on the show, which is really cool. She's very well on her way to being one. She's already reached influencer status because of the blue ticks on Instagram. She's not just musically talented to be qualified as an artist, she's equally brilliant as well, academically speaking. She's graduated from Harvard University and she's on her way to studying music at Berklee School of Music, which just really blows my mind because I managed to just pass chemical engineering from Heriot-Watt in Dubai. So honestly, thank you so much for joining us, Avanti. It's a pleasure to have you on the show with us.
Thank you so much, and thank you to both of you for having me here.
Yeah.
I think I'd always been kind of academically inclined, when I was younger, and I was very clear that I wanted to get, a college degree in a standard liberal arts kind of setting. We're all South Asian, we're all Desi, right, from different parts of the world, and if in case you weren't sure, all of my grandparents were doctors. So, kind of grew up around that. And I also had several health issues through my life, kind of growing up. I was born with a heart defect and I lost vision in my eye when I was 16. And there's a lot of different things. And the thing that got me through all of that was music. So that's kind of my connection to the two together. But because of my interest in healthcare and just growing up around it, I always thought that I wanted to do something in the space of psychology, global health, and health, right? And when music started becoming more of a reality and when I recognized that the passion was something that could become a profession in some regards, it was important to me to be able to give myself opportunities to pursue both in a way that I was able to feel and understand the spaces, right? So for me, a lot of people are confused. They're like, wait, so if you want to be a musician full time, why are you studying psychology and global health? And then people, at Berklee were like, so why are you studying the brain? I don't understand. So it was always this, back and forth misunderstanding, so to speak. But I think, there's several of us who are what one might call creatives with intellectual passions, or vice versa, right? And I think it's really amazing to see that this idea of formalized institution, which is just so prevalent, at least in our communities and societies, are starting to support that, right? Often folks who wanted to pursue that would have to go elsewhere to find it, but now there's support from the institutions itself, which is amazing.
100%. I'm sure you must know Steven Weber, from Berklee.
Yes.
Yeah. So I did a little bit of a crash course with him, and he spoke so much about psychology and its effects on music. And it's fascinating to see somebody who is, I'm pretty sure, taken it a step further and gone down both routes simultaneously. Do you see the connection, so I've heard, I'm not so sure how far this is true, but basically I was told that when people sing together, there's a neurological thing that happens and the body releases endorphins and dopamine and whatnot. And so it's like a group psychology kind of thing. Is there anything you could tell us about that? The powers of music.
100%. I mean, if you look at psychology and music, right, from the point of view of music itself, there's a reason that fields like music therapy exist, right, or arts therapy, because music has healing properties, not just in and within itself as an art form, but also in terms of the vibrational balance, in terms of the way in which the neuronal connections, right? A lot of people, especially if they have speech impairments or if they have memory learning issues such as dementia or Alzheimer's, many of them are asked to do music or music therapy in some capacity, because being able to string something along with melody and lyrics is also using different parts of your brain, right? And so it helps bring back and recollect certain memory pieces. And psychology and music, just the idea of the way in which music affects your brain is phenomenal and also very little understood. So I think there's more that needs to be done in that area. Secondly, also, if you look at just entertainment broadly and psychology, right? There is so much to be said about that intersection, whether it's from the marketing standpoint or whether it's from the standpoint of, for example, let's say you want to put out a social impact message into the world, whatever it might be, right? Let's take health, because we're talking about it. Let's talk about coronavirus, right? You want to tell people how to prevent themselves from getting the disease and certain measures they might take. it's one thing to put out a informational tool, right, from official organizations, and it's another thing to put out a song or a video or something that attracts you in a certain different way. And kind of there's a lot of, I can explain the psychological mechanisms if you're interested, but it's just fascinating to leverage the arts as well as entertainment and as well as psychology together.
I think the Thailand government did something like that. That's amazing. I literally wanted to speak about that as well, because you brought it up where you said, you know, it hasn't been explored that much from a neurological standpoint, the effects of music on the brain. Like I have a theory, like I don't know how far this is true, maybe you could clarify it. But like, you know, some people like learn music through notes, and like they learn, you know, each thing, you do this on the guitar and this happens, you hit this key on the piano. But and then there's some people who just sort of have that divine inspiration, like, you know, they keep trying something over and over until it sort of makes sense, and then they can somehow channel the creative ether into their instrument or their voice or like whatever. Does this have something to do with the brain, or is there any neurological basis for, like, you know, both the brains functioning together, or is it just the right brain, something like that?
No, it definitely does, right? There's a number of things when it comes to this. One is there's some people who are born with a certain affinity for music, right? For example, if you look at Charlie Puth, right? Charlie Puth is somebody who has essentially what we call perfect pitch. And what that is this spatial-visual representation of musical notes in someone's head, whereby it's hard for you and me to understand that if we don't have it. But it's almost like a natural, it's the same way in which people are good at numbers. You know, he's good at kind of identifying that space. So there's one where you're kind of prone to that. The other is, like you were saying, what is the effect on your brain? I think it's a dual effect, right? Because there's one argument to be made, like you mentioned, Nikhil, about things related to speech and fluency, whereby music becomes that glue and that tool. And there's another argument to be made, right, about music as this medium for connection, because it's a universal language, right? You see music across evolution in some form or another. For some species, they're musical when they're mating. For some species, they're musical when they're doing a war cry for survival, right? So it's fascinating that it's existed for centuries and eons, and
across.
And I still think we don't know what it's like to harness its power. You know,
100%. And it's fascinating to see that it exists in, like, all across the animal kingdom, like birds and, you know, dolphins. I don't know, but yeah.
Like, I've never thought of like music while mating, and like that just sounds weird. Like, I've sang, but it wasn't the best thing. Like, you know, it's not the best thing to do when you're in bed. Like, you know, just going at it and then you feel it. There's room in this world for, you know, love-making playlists.
Exactly.
So no one's saying you have to sing.
No, there is. That was like. But so there were two really mindfuck experiences of it, right? Like there was a time where my friends just tried fucking with me. Like, you know, I was in the room with someone and then they started singing like Lion King music, and they're like, oh, we can definitely cock block this guy. But what they don't know is I love Lion King. So this dude, they started singing, and I was like, we are one, you and I. We are like the earth and sky. Let's get it. Like, you think you can stop me? You can't. This is the power of music.
That's a beautiful sentiment.
Oh my God! Thank you for that very visual anecdote.
Hey, I'm not. There was no graphic detail in that.
Nikhil,
right? That was just
completely
information.
censored.
Perceive it as you will. You see, that's the problem with people who have. By the way, welcome to that the unfiltered show, right? It's really there's nothing that's gonna be very. This is not PG. Like, you're not supposed to.
We
watch
did
this
one
with
PG
kids.
episode, and the guy started swearing like
I didn't even
halfway
show to my
through it.
parents.
Like, it was so odd.
Also, we did it with that. Like, we were just talking about learning, right? Like, which is the other thing I wanted to come to. So, you chose you choose your educational experience in the US. So, I want to take you, sort of track back and ask you, what made you choose the US over India? And like, you know, there's so many young artists that are coming up, especially now the current wave is rap, right? Like, there are a lot of people who are expressing emotions. They're expressing sentiment related to, they're expressing societal sentiments, right? So it could be to do with caste and, you know, just the disparity between the poor and the rich and so many things. Now, when that wave is coming up in India, I feel that there is something that our system's kind of lacking in playing a role in enabling
100%.
those people, right? Like we're not. I feel like. So you chose that. What is that experience that you got in the US that maybe our country and our systems can learn
to
from?
answer that's a great question. We have to
Do you
go a
think
little
that'd
bit
be
back in time to when I was born, and the reason for that is I was born in the U.S. and I lived there till I was 9. So I already have a deep connection,
Okay.
and I'm a U.S. citizen, etc. So it became a more accessible choice
Okay.
to me than say for some other folks. On one hand, the second is like I mentioned, all my grandparents are doctors, and both my parents immigrated to the U.S. when they were young for education. So education has always been this kind of bedrock in my family, right? And I knew that was something that was important
Right.
to them and was important to me because I knew that it would give me a solid foundation. And from a musical perspective, so I started off, my dad plays the tabla, and my mom's pretty spiritual, so I started off, even when I was in the US, I used to sing bhajans and devotional songs, and then when I moved to Bombay, when I was 9, I started training in Indian classical music. So I do have a foundation in kind of our richer heritage-based spaces, right, in Indian classical music and other spaces, and I can take you through my musical journey later on, but essentially to answer your question, right, what is the difference? To me, it was an accessible choice, therefore I took it. If I didn't have the opportunity, and I recognize there's a privilege in having access to education in the US and having access to that, to me, part of it was how can I take what I've learned there and kind of apply it here, right, where to a place that I call home, and how can I make certain traditions of ours accessible in a larger global scale, right? So
100%.
I think, for folks, especially whether it's in the rap or hip hop scene or whether it's in the independent music scene, which is really burgeoning in India, I don't think it's necessary to have a formal education. I think it helps to have some sort of structure, especially if you want to improve your craft, right? If you want to improve your vocal craft or guitar craft or whatever. But it's not at all necessary. And I think, honestly, it was something that I chose because it was something that was so known to me, If it hadn't been known to me, I don't know if I would have chosen that path. And so what I've seen, at least, is the difference is in the US, our educational offerings are made accessible such that you have the path to pursue these things. In India, we have a lot of, like, if you look at the folk music industry, if you look at the music or entertainment space, it's all there, but it's not accessible as a chosen path unless you have access in the form of nepotism or family history or just that real deep hunger and drive, right? And it's not something that's supported at a societal level unless you make it, right? Unless you become a Bollywood star or unless you become someone who's well known, it becomes just a hobby, right?
Exactly.
And that's something that I think needs to change from an inward out looking space, right? And that's a bias that we all have that only we can kind of put into motion and share and start to take that revolution. And I'm so proud of people in India who are really rising up. Like if you look at a Divine, right? You look at an AZ, you look at so many folks kind of in this space, they've made it no questions asked, right? And no real necessary, I'm sure they have support from family members, but not necessarily societal support. So it's amazing. It's amazing to see.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. When you drop down and look at other people like Emiwe Bantai, who came from like the guy, like Dakshey, I don't know if you know, Emiwe Bantai is a guy that who recently made a song with Snoop Dogg, and before this he dropped this great song with Dax, right? And the guy is
100%.
putting India on a pedestal, dude. I absolutely love it because the last time Indians collaborated with Americans, it was Sing is King, where Snoop Dogg came and sang with Akshay Kumar on one really fuck all background graphics thing. Like, it was worse than In the End. Like, so when you go from there to there in like 10 years, you're kind of glad, like there's some change.
Yeah.
In India, so there is, depending on what level and craft, right? So you have the True School of Music, you have Furtados, you have KM Conservatory, which is in Chennai. There's a ton, right? And they they all have different places. And I do have friends who've gone to each of them.
And so, like, how would you say? What would you say would be the core differences in terms of how music is taught and the not just the mode of instruction, but the way they teach you in terms of thinking about music, etc.
What is that core difference
Yeah.
between studies in India and in the US? What does Berklee offer that,
I mean, I think it's changing, right? I think it's amazing to see that institutions here are starting to draw from all the good and the bad learnings of places. I think the difference at its core is just the idea of infrastructural support. And what I mean by that, right, is you have talented instructors coming from different places in the world, which is amazing. You need to make sure that those instructors teach people from India. You need to have folks, who are empowered from India itself, because if it's constantly international faculty, that's amazing and it is a draw, but it's not empowering inner, kind of from the inside out.
Fair.
That's one. Second is the reason anybody would go. So my educational experience was slightly different because I'm doing a dual degree at both, and just the way my program works logistically is I get a bachelor's degree at Harvard and I get a master's at Berklee. So I just finished my bachelor's at Harvard literally last week, and I start my master's. Yeah, and I start my master's this month. But I had access to both schools, right? And I think the difference is that you have access to a cohort of students who most of whom are going to do this professionally, right? Which is not to say that folks in India aren't, but I think there's a little bit less incentive for them to, right? And it's a little bit because the infrastructure of the industry itself is not developed as much. Currently, the industry, until about, I would say 5 or 7 years ago, the infrastructure of the industry was catered toward the film industry, right? You wanted to do something, sure, you become an engineer for film. You become a playback singer for film, right? And obviously that's been changing for the past several years, but unless you have more of that infrastructure, or unless we create entrepreneurial opportunities for people to enter the industry in a different way, it's not going to be considered in the same way. Does that make sense?
So you're talking about how songs were always primarily paired with film releases rather than independent releases, right? Like compared to how it's done in the West. Okay, understood.
I think that's where the money goes to in India. Like the entire Bollywood industry seems like I don't want to say the word cult, but it's kind of what it was. Like, it was just very self-centered. Everything went into that, and there was no incentive to go outside it. To become an independent artist, that's unheard of.
If you look at the US in the 60s, right? If you look at like the Frank Sinatra generation of artists, a lot of them are voicing things for theater and for film, right? Obviously, maybe not the same exact stronghold that Bollywood had, but everything started from there. The difference is that we are currently in 2020 and we have access to technology in a way that was not the case, 40-something years ago. Therefore, I think it's just going to move faster. And if you see our generation, India this year, in the year 2020, is the youngest country in the world, right? And our generation doesn't take any bullshit, basically, right? When it comes to their consumption preferences, when it comes to their creation preferences, when it comes to anything and everything, right? And so they see through a veneer of trying to stage something, right? And I think we respond more to authenticity. So I think there's power and potential for more voices to be heard. It's just about how do we mobilize together, as an industry and as a community.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think the youth in India is like the music listeners are a very burgeoning population. They haven't explored everything that the world has to offer. It seems like they're blindsided by what's pop, like what comes in, and also like some stuff from a couple years ago. Like the script is really famous still for some reason, like their first album, like for the first time and all that stuff. And it's surprising because like music goes so fast and like there's new stuff all the time, which seems to take a while to reach India, I think. But and also like since you said about 60s, that's really fascinating because I always had a theory. I have theories for everything. But
what is your theory?
I swear I want to make that your catchphrase, bro. Like it's just like I have a theory, bro. Like just
I have a hypothesis. The theory is that India right now seems to be US in the 60s. Like when they were dropping basically I want to take this to a conspiratorial space, but like just touching on the subject. But US in the 60s seemed like they were inciting the fact that the government, the state, is going to be a police surveillance state, like not completely, but just hinting at it with the amount of movies about police, and it was always like the police crossing the law to catch the bad guy who crossed the law even more.
Yes.
Like, it was justifying the police crossing the boundaries to get the bad guy. And I've seen such a spike in movies in India like that recently. like the new Rajnikant movie and all that stuff, and I'm watching that. I'm like, Jesus
Bro, that
Christ.
movie gave me AIDS in my eyes. I don't know if that's possible. It did. Like, I just saw that and I was like, nahi. Nahi karte aise, bro. Like, why? But like, they still have that shitty 60s mentality. Pair like 100-year-old guy with an 18-year-old girl. Like, why? Like, just...
Yeah.
God, man.
But at the same time, as Avanti said, technology has advanced so much that, you know, our development is so much faster than what it would have been in the US in the 60s. So I don't think it's really something, you know, it's just a fact, like, that we are still maturing as a population.
Totally.
As a
I mean, and we've been you know, what the world classifies as a developing nation for a long time, right? It's as much as we'd love to compare it, it's hard to compare when you have a developed nation versus a developing one in economic perspectives,
Exactly.
right? And you know, our families, whatever our backgrounds might be individually, there might be difference, but our families would be considered still the 1%, right? And that's just a fact we have to accept, right? And so
For sure.
recognizing what is the bulk of the country, what is the bulk of the nation, and I think the biggest thing anybody can do in the next 10 to 15 years in India is be a job creator in some capacity, right? Because job creation is the only thing that's going to kind of boom the economy and boom this amazing youth power that we have to harness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Coming from a music standpoint, what sort of, where do you think the industry should step forward to? Like, what could be created for the youth to enjoy independent artists and, you know, experience the creativity that, you know, you have experienced in the US, I have to a certain extent in the UK. How do we bring this to India?
I think it's creating channels, right? And so, for example, for my work today, a lot of my original music thus far has been primarily English language based. I'm working on a couple songs in a couple other languages as well. But if you look at the platforms and the ways in which you can promote and get eyeballs and things, it's very, very limited, right? And even that is to a very specific segment. So I think it's creating channels of distribution whereby you kind of put independent music and you give it the opportunity to grow in the same way that you do give film music. Today, what I've seen is what's been successful is a lot of non-film music that still sounds like film music, which is great, but it still defeats the whole purpose, you know, of trying to create this separate 100%. Space and honoring the separate sound and the space, right? So that's one. And the second is really just like a change inside out, right? I think it's whether it's labels or whether it's folks who really have that harnessing power. Today as an independent artist, like the thing that makes music or musicians in the US still today is radio. And I think that India still has that power because there's so many folks who are tuned into radio, whether it's internet radio or otherwise. Figuring out ways for that to be more accessible to the independent industry, right? Today it's still controlled by labels in a way that is still controlled by the film space, you know?
Yeah, that's actually, those
like,
are very
you know,
solid.
just as you said that, 100%. Like I just had an idea, like, you know, as you said that, you know, labels own the radio. I mean, not own, like they control some of the radio stations. Maybe like for promoting, allegedly, but, maybe like we could have curators, like Spotify playlist curators, directed at, you know, making playlists for, you know, like chosen independent artists, like perhaps, you know, the top 10 best releases from somebody completely unknown, you know, some sort of roulette wheel that showcases new talent, just to keep it fresh.
I don't know if Spotify is
like
necessarily the most accessible in India though still. I mean, obviously it's made waves, right? But I would argue that Asava, Nagana, even YouTube are still more accessible to the general populace, right?
Yeah.
And I also think that there's a huge divide, I don't know if y'all have felt this, in India between what is considered indie, like you're either very indie or you're not. And that middle ground of just pop music for itself, right, which is non-film and non-this, is a very hard space to be in because it's, you know, you're looked upon as too pop by the indie industry. And sometimes you're looked upon as like this, you're not indie. It's just this weird space to be in. And as somebody whose music, I would say, falls into that middle category, right, it's definitely an interesting line to traverse.
So wait, could you elaborate on that? I'm just trying to understand this because I'm the non-music guy here. But what's like when you say indie music? Are you talking about like, you know, what's that? like Chai Met Toast and
Yes.
the local train. Like those guys are indie.
Those are definitely indie. And there's amazing, I mean, nothing to discount any, but there's amazing indie singer-songwriters, right, who are so incredible, and I can give you more names if you'd like, right? But that's kind of more of the, whether it's the singer-songwriter vibe or it's the band vibe or it's this very, it's indie pop, right? Like what you would call indie, which essentially means independent.
What is the difficulty around, navigating, for an artist to navigate themselves through the pop space in India?
The difficulty is threefold. One is they're competing with what is considered pop today, which is Bollywood, right? So that's a hard competition in itself. Second is the pop space and the imagery and kind of the things behind it that required, whether it's the visuals or, when I put on a show as a pop artist, I can totally be there with a piano and myself, but that's not the authenticity of pop, right? Pop is meant to be performative and it's meant to be a show, and it can show that authentic side, like the more vulnerable side, but it's meant to be kind of larger than life in a capacity, right? And kind of be the entertainment experience in one package. And so you're so used to being primed by the Bollywood and film space, big budget, that if you don't have the budget, you're kind of at a loss, and so it's that interesting middle ground where it's like you're a little bit more and you can still be scrappy and do pop, right? But you're perceived as less scrappy than the indie industry, the indie space. But you don't have the big budget of the Bollywood or huge establishments. You're kind of stuck in the middle.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, I see. That's fascinating to see the divide, created, because it's completely created by ourselves. We are so hooked on Bollywood for ages that now having new artists, we're not sure what to expect because
and
we've
there's so
given
many
so much
people
of
who
their
just who
expectations
got their
to
mind close to it, right?
the
Like
overlord, which
I
is
feel
Bollywood.
so unique when I tell people that, yeah, dude, have you listened to, and they're like, wow, what is this local train and all that shit. So so at one point, even your people are so close when you tell them, hey, let's put this song, they're like, "Arey yaar, gana badal de, let's put the latest put something from a more recent Bollywood playlist," and you're like, dude, just us listening to this is part of that change. Us listening to this is part of that revolution, right? But speaking of making independent music, we've heard that you're into musical improv of some kind. So I was told that we're going to do some improv, like an improv jam sesh.
Yes,
Awesome.
I would be super down. So I also have a background in theater. I used to do a lot of professional theater in India, and so kind of drawing from that, I do this property at live shows, and now on this virtual live situation where we essentially it's called Song on the Spot, and the premise is very simple. We create songs out of stories, right? And stories can be an actual story being told by a storyteller, such as one of you, or it can be words and phrases, and then often I'll have a musician or some way to create music in some capacity to be able to do that together. So I'm aware, Dakshey, that you are also a musician. I just don't know what the lag situation is going to be like, so we can try it.
Let's
he
give
has
it a
his
shot.
guitar handy, of course he does. So why don't we, since we have two folks and it just makes it easier,
Cool.
Nikhil, if you could be our storyteller for this. So all you need to do is come up with, it can be literally anything. I've made stories about
You might want to
whatever
double
you
check
want.
that because
And
you're
Dakshey-
putting that kind of responsibility in a very volatile person. Like I can really just come up with some fucked up shit that our audience
That's
may
okay.
like. Where you okay, you know what? I'll keep it neat and good because but.
No, feel free to, so long as I'm not like abusing every second word.
I know,
I'm
that's perfectly fine. I'm just saying because we did this in musical improv. Like I've done musical improv shows with the same thing, so I know. So I'm not going to make this super annoying.
Yeah.
Okay, so for a first idea, why don't we talk about a failed love story between a Hindu boy and a Muslim girl in modern day India, where these moral policing groups come and kind of give them a hard time and prevent them from being together. I think that's a very realistic topic that we can touch on, so why don't we talk about that? Let the guy's name be Ankit and the girl's name be Fatima. So yeah, Ankit, Fatima, and Hindu boy, Muslim, Brahmin boy, Muslim girl, make it more controversial, and they can't be together. Yeah.
Let's do it. This is the story of Ankit and Fatima, a Brahmin guy and a Muslim woman. This is the story does religion have to come in the way? Why does religion have to bring doomsday? Let's go back to the story. It was Valentine's Day. They were walking in a park and mounting their own way. The next thing they knew, they were spotted by the orange heads, and they were taken, and Ankit was beaten to shreds. But luckily he was spared, 'cause he was palatable. Luckily he was spared, 'cause he knew what to say. Why does religion always come in the way? Why does religion bring our doomsday? Why does religion always come in the way? Why does religion always bring doomsday? So you might ask yourself, what happened to Fatima? Like many women, Muslim children, she was silenced, and her voice is not heard in our story. But I'll tell you today, it's important to remember that differences come in the way. And why does religion bring us come in the way? And why does religion bring our doomsday? Why does religion always come in the way? And why does religion bring a doomsday? If we are not careful, then Ankit and Fatima will only be the first in a lineup of lovers, yeah. And you should know the difference between what makes us whole and whether you're black or white, Hindu, Muslim, Dalit or not. You should know that what really is important is what's on the inside. And you should know, why does religion always come in the way? Why does religion bring our doomsday? Why does religion always come in the way? Why does religion bring our doomsday?
That was amazing. Holy shit. So, would you be open to trying another one?
Sure.
Like I was thinking of a story. All right. So I was like toying with this concept. I just got this line from a song. Like, so I differ from you in one thing. Like, I'd so much rather just be a songwriter than an out-and-out artist. Like, you know, I live and breathe that
I
stuff.
love that.
You know, just exploring life through other people's eyes. Like,
I love
fascinates
that.
me. So this like sort of hook came to me one fine day, and it was basically the story about a horse who's lost at
Okay.
sea. So it was like.
I love
Something
that.
like that. So I was thinking, like, you know, if you could improv a song about a horse who gets lost at sea, and you know, so basically you're the horse, and you're lost at sea, and you're like used to running, but now you're stuck in a boat
Okay.
or something, like, you know, and so it's about confusion and about shipwrecks and about how you plan to, you know, get back on track.
Get back on track?
Holy shit, I didn't think of that before. Yeah.
I love that.
Can
Yeah,
we try?
super down. Yeah,
Yeah.
let's do it.
Awesome.
I am a pony, and I come here to tell you my story. I am a pony, and I'm lost at sea. I am used to running on this land, but all the destruction done by man makes me feel like I'm a one-track pony out in the over here just to be here for you and me. So how did I get here, you ask? I was shipwrecked. We were attacked by pirates, and it was that or my neck for the killing. So I said, why not take a million and escape out on this journey to the sea where I know destiny will find me, 'cause I'm a one-track pony lost at sea. I'm a one-track pony, oh, that could be me. I'm a one-track pony out at sea. I'm a one-track pony, that could be me. In this world of confusion, it's a horse against a man. But in this world of confusion, we should all come together and band together like Noah's Ark. And we will know someday that what we think inside our minds could be displayed in this bay. 'Cause I'm a one-track pony, and that could be me. I'm a one-track pony lost at sea. I'm a one-track pony, just finding my worth like you, this human in the deep blue sea. Woo!
That was so good.
Okay, now for our final part, Avanti, why don't you go ahead and actually just roast me? I think it'd be really funny if you did. Yeah, so we're just gonna have a musical improv roast of Nikhil done by an influencer who's met me just for the first time. So let's see if she can just, gauge enough material and sort of come up with something creative on her own.
I would be super happy to, except I don't know you well enough, Nikhil, to roast you. So maybe Dakshey, if you could help me out in that department, that would be amazing.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Perfect. Okay, so Dakshey, why don't you give me a little soundtrack to Nikhil's roast?
Yeah.
One more time. Okay. I'm a cheap man whore with some shit hair on my head. I'm a cheap man whore who thinks that I suck in bed. I'm a cheap man whore, and my name is Nikhil. I'm a hippie, but I fail. Get that on your big deal. I'm a cheap man whore with some shit talking face. I'm a cheap man whore who basically lacks grace. I'm a cheap man whore who's trying to be a hippie, but I cannot sing. No, I cannot ring. Basically, I cannot do anything. My name is Nikhil, and I try to say to the ladies and the men, oh, come my way. But I make way too many sex jokes, I turn them all away. And as much as I try, none of them can stay. So I'm a cheap man whore, and my name is Nikhil. I'm a cheap man whore with a shit-talking face. I'm a cheap man whore who wears a Hawaiian shirt, 'cause I try to look cool with my glasses too cool for school. I try to look cool with the watch and the swag. I think I might be into Star Trek, but you won't know. I think I might be able to rock your bed, but you won't know. 'Cause you won't come my way. I'm Nikhil, what you say? Who is a cheap man whore trying to climb into my bed? Who is that cheap man whore with that shit-talking face and that beard? Who is Nikhil, you might ask someone? Well, Nikhil's a cheap man whore. Sorry, that's all I got without no Nikhil.
You know what? That was so good. Oh my goodness. Really good job. I mean, that was awesome, Avanti. Thank you so much. That was a roast that I really enjoyed, and I'm pretty sure the same can be said for everyone who listens to it.
Oh yeah.
Well, that was an amazing episode. Thank you so much to you guys and to you, Avanti, for joining us on this journey. We really had a great time. You know, the conversations were great, and that roast session of Nikhil was so artistically done. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Avanti. That was great.
Shut himself up.
Oh
Well
my
done.
god, thank you all for having me. And I'm so sorry
Yeah.
for being
That
late
was
and the whole
amazing.
delay. It was just a crazy
Oh,
situation.
don't worry about it.
Thank you so much for joining in, and we hope you enjoyed this episode. And until the next episode, see you, take care, stay safe, and we're out.